Well, I'll just start by saying that it's not a nice task to follow Michael Taft, a professional economist and celebrity even, you might say.
You're a celebrity.
My task in the 15 minutes I have is to look at what is the crisis of capitalism that we're going through, because I think it's important that if we want to treat the illness, we have to diagnose how we got here and how it came about. We'll just begin with one quote. The price of this financial crisis is being borne by people who absolutely didn't cause it. That wasn't somebody in the Socialist Party who said it, that's the Governor of the Bank of England. He went on to say that he doesn't know how the anger in society isn't more publicly expressed, because obviously what is going on, and Michael has explained it, is an absolute robbery of ordinary people towards the rich and the super wealthy in society. What's the nature of this crisis in capitalism, in the economy worldwide, and how serious is it? Well, just a few stark figures. Industrial output worldwide fell by 13%. International trade fell by 20%, and the stock markets collapsed by 50%. It's the deepest crisis that we've had since the 1930s. And in fact, from 2007 to 2008, in 1 year, the bottom was reached, whereas it took 3 years for the Great Depression to reach the same amount of losses. So it was actually quite stark. 64 million people have been driven into poverty worldwide. We know, I don't think I need to spend any amount of time explaining to people here the suffering that people are enduring. There's been an unprecedented and coordinated intervention by world capitalism into the banking system. 21 trillion has been put into the global financial system. Now that is 1.5 times American GDP that has been pumped into the finance system to rescue it and to bail it out. So this is a serious global slump. It doesn't mean there can't be rises and recoveries for a period of time, but I think we are going through a period of crises, of sharp recessions, of bailouts, of contractions in economies. And I think we should look at how realistic is it that capitalism, as we know it, will have a recovery. If you take unemployment in America, which is obviously the most powerful capitalist country in the world, it would take a boom of a decade, creating jobs at twice the level was created in 2010 to even get back to where the country was at before 2007, based on population growth as well. So you can see how very unlikely that is to happen. And by the way, I thought it was interesting as the election results were rolling in, that 4 out of 10 African Americans experienced unemployment in that year, since this great recession began. So what's at the root of the crisis? It's probably very commonly referred to as a financial crisis and seen that way. But I think there is no doubt that capitalism had a huge switch, from the 1980s onwards towards speculation, finance capital, short-term profits at the expense of real production in many ways. We saw that when the finance sector, the profits from the finance sector in the Anglo-Saxon countries rose from 20% of the overall to 50%. And I think we've all seen it ourselves, even the likes of Sean Quinn moving into speculation and so on. But I think it would be wrong to see it as just a financial crisis, because 4.5 years after all that money being pumped in, the banks are still in crisis. So there's a lot more to it than just that. It's a lot more systemic than that. It isn't just an over-reliance in finance. They went a bit mad. They should get back now to production. It was kind of a rogue capitalist period. That's not the case at all. I think the roots of the crisis are obviously down to, and Michael spent a fair bit of time quite rightly on investment, a collapse in investment. But the collapse in investment has been going on for a long period of time, and has been due to a fall in rates of profit, not just since 1980 when neoliberalism was began through Thatcher, Reagan and so on, but even back in the 70s profits were falling. What we see now, I mean, Michael gave some of the figures, in terms of investment, is corporate cash hoarding. The amount of money that's being held by companies who refuse to invest it is phenomenal. 5% of gross domestic product in Britain is being held by companies and by firms. That's from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, again, not a left person. Non-financial firms in America are sitting on trillions, 2 trillion in deposits. And internationally, I think the figure came out recently of 21 trillion that's just not being invested, that's being hidden from use for the common good, which is an amazing indictment of the system. In Ireland, obviously heavily reliant historically on foreign direct investment. You can just see the collapse there. 2005 it was 43.5 billion, 2011 it was 16 billion. You know, so there's just been a huge collapse in it. And it is, you know, very interesting. I'd be interested to hear what people say. You know, how can these people be persuaded to come back and reinvest in Ireland? How realistic is that? In America, capacity in factories is at 77%. So you have a situation where you've got mass unemployment and, you know, mass underuse of capital. The contradiction of the system is huge. Now, I think in relation to Ireland, as Michael said, a very weak capitalist system historically for a lot of reasons, ex-colonial country. In the 1920s, they had to move, they didn't ideologically want to state intervention to get basic infrastructure up and running. And in 1930s, moved back to protectionism to try and, you know, boost jobs in the country. And then obviously, as we all know, in the 60s, opened up the economy to foreign direct investment as being the spine, if you like, of Irish capitalism. The Celtic Tiger in Ireland was brought about by exceptional factors. And even during that, obviously the boom didn't resolve an awful lot of the problems for most people, working class people. And I think the investment strike that's taken place internationally is going to impact on Ireland even more. But if you look at the two sectors that the Irish ruling elite say will be the recovery in Ireland, which is exports and, you know, attracting in foreign investment. Everyone knows you can't talk about corporate taxes being reduced. We might put off foreign investors. But what is the real situation in the export sector, which we hear about every day? Well, first of all, 90% of the export sector is foreign-based. That's very important for the 140,000 people who work in it, but it doesn't bring and accrue huge benefits to the economy overall. And if there is to be any recovery, it will obviously have to be based in the domestic sector. Just this great export sector that's thriving that we keep hearing about. In 2011, exports had risen by 61% in that previous 10 years, but overall employment was lower than it was in 2000. So even though the figure is rising, the number of people employed is minimal and marginal. There's 9,500 workers responsible for 73% of the total of exports in the country. 2.5% responsible for 69%. And even the value of exports is being grossly and deliberately and artificially made out to be much bigger than it is. I think the computer sector, I don't have time to go into it too much, but is very telling. Google, as we know, made 10 billion profits in 2010 and in their base in Ireland. But I mean, as we know, Google doesn't employ very many people. It was mainly advertising that they were raising from all around the world, but the office in Ireland was collecting the money. So it's a deliberate ploy to avail of, obviously, tax write-offs. Microsoft, similarly. Facebook, their base in Ireland collects bills from customers all around the world. So even though, you know, they generate a huge proportion of the money, it was discovered that there was a law firm in Dublin which was holding the whole Microsoft operation, which was controlling 16 billion of Microsoft's profits. But, you know, the number of people employed was absolutely minimal. So I think the reason I went through the figures is these are the sectors that we're told will bring recovery in Ireland by Richard Bruton and by the others, by Fianna Fáil and by Labour. Now, is the crisis that we're experiencing due to a lack of demand? Obviously, demand is being driven down by austerity. If you take money out of people's pockets, as Michael said, they don't have the money to spend in the economy. And Keynesian economists would argue that all we need to do is to stimulate the economy, to get investment going again, and to boost demand as a solution. The famous, he's very famous now, he's quoted a lot, Paul Krugman, said, by applying the time-honoured economic principles, we could be back to more or less full employment very fast, probably in less than 2 years. Now, I think by anyone's estimate, that's a very simplistic way of putting it. All that's blocking recovery is a lack of intellectual clarity and political will. And that was Krugman's solution to the crisis. Now, as socialists and as people on the left, I think we should support and we should obviously call for public investment, which many Keynesian economists would also do, to restore the purchasing power of working people. But there is limits to what can be achieved by Keynesianism. Keynesianism was, after the Second World War, the conditions were there for it. But Keynesian policies can't work in a modern capitalist economy in the same way. The structure of capitalism is very different now to what it was at that time. Global economic relations are very different. For example, Russia was a major power on the globe. The capitalist West had a huge interest in ensuring that there wasn't that economies around Russia and in Central Europe were developed, and they pumped money in. You also don't have the same power of workers' organisations which you had from 1945 on. And it really would be working class people campaigning, taking to the streets, mobilising, that would get that money invested into the economy. As Michael said, it won't come from private capital out of their largesse, it would have to be fought for. And I just think that markets as well are much more influential than they were at the time when Keynes was advocating investing in economies. There's huge power now to speculate and to forecast against governments, essentially, if they take measures against private interests. Now, as Michael said, austerity is working for some people. Just looking at it logically, capitalism, if you like, wouldn't be taking on the trouble of bringing in austerity if there wasn't a reason for it. It isn't the case that it's just an insane, madness, an ideological thing that they have to do. It suits the needs of capitalism right now to bring in austerity, and we have to understand that it isn't just a case of convincing them that it's morally wrong. And the reason for it is to try to improve profitability again and to crush workers' rights and conditions in order to do that. David McNally, the economist, also pointed out that after the historical bailouts that have been given to the private banks and to the private sector, austerity suits the system internationally at the moment. Rather than, he said, being a merely ideological programme, austerity is based on the actual power of global finance to discipline governments via bond markets. So for things like reducing debt, for privatising, for getting rid of social programmes, all of that is suiting them at the moment to after the great bailout that they've had. So I'll just finish my remarks by saying we've seen a systemic crisis. It was 25 years from 1980, I hope I get my maths right here, from 1982 to 2007, if you like, of a certain phase in capitalism, of neoliberalism, of wiping away the rights and the conditions of working class people, getting rid of the welfare state, and so on. And if you look through the history of capitalism and of economics, any structural, any period of change like that is going to require huge structural change to bring a crisis to an end. For example, in 1939, the way the crisis was ended was by war. Now, I don't think we're advocating that as our solution. So, you know, the way that the crisis was ended in the Great Depression wasn't through Roosevelt, because it re-emerged in 1937. It was actually ended through, you know, public spending to bring about, to fight a war. And the carnage and the price that working class people around the world paid for that, we all know. And we don't want to see the age of austerity being resolved by a huge crisis where working class people pay. So it's up to us to arm, I don't mean militarily, but to arm people with the truth about what's going on, and to explain how it must be fought, that a huge struggle against austerity and for investment must be fought for by working class people. And I'm sure Paul will go into some more on that. Thanks.